Noswaith dda gyfeillion, gael croesawu chi i drafodaeth arbennig heddiw ar ddiwrnod nodi 10 mlynedd, na i ddim dweud dathlu, ers referendum Brexit. Ar ôl i'n siaradwyr wneud eu cyfraniadau, bydd cyfle i chi holi cwestiynau. Yn Saesneg bydd y drafodaeth, ond os ydych chi'n dymuno gofyn cwestiwn yn y Gymraeg, mae croeso chi wneud hynny, ac mi fydda i'n cyfieithu'r cwestiwn ar gyfer aelodau panel. Well, good evening, fellow Europeans. I'd like to welcome you to a special Zoom session today, the 23rd of June, which marks the 10th anniversary, I wouldn't say commemoration, the 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum. I've explained to my Welsh-speaking friends that after our speaker's presentation, and we're still waiting for one speaker to come, there will be an opportunity for you, the audience, to ask the panel members questions. I've told my Welsh-speaking colleagues they can ask questions in Welsh and I'll translate them for the panel, though I think that Carmen would understand anyway. The panellists are well known within the European supporting community, both within Wales and more widely. We have in no particular order, but being a gentleman, I start with the lady. We have Baroness Carmen Smith, the Plaid Cymru peer who wishes to abolish the House of Lords. And she's the Vice President of the European Movement UK. We also have Dr. Mike Galsworthy, the Chair of the European Movement UK, who is also known for his connection with Byline Citizen Journalism Movement. Now, you might have seen the emblem behind me here. There we are. And on Rob, you see. This is a bit of a plug. I hope you don't mind.
Excellent. I don't mind at all.
I'm sure you're right. Mike is known for his connection with the Byline Citizen Journalism Movement. And the emblem representing Byline's Cymru, of which I and Rob there are joint editors-in-chief, together with some other colleagues. Now, the third member of the panel is Anthony Slaughter. He will join us later, I think. He's busy with a personal matter at the moment. He's a Green member of the Senedd, and he's also the President of Wales for Europe, Cymru dros Europe, and wants to hold on to that title and role. Now, just one more comment, if I may. As you should know, I'm sure you do know, we have a new devolved government in Wales with a new First Minister, Rhys Iorwerth, who is quoted in the Western Mail saying today, Brexit is the greatest act of economic self-sabotage in modern history. Discuss. Okay. Would Carmen like to make a few initial comments?
Fawr iawn, Gareth. Thank you, Gareth. Noswaith dda pawb. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be invited to join this discussion this evening. Unfortunately, as we're saying, not celebrating, of course, but this marks 10 years since the Brexit referendum and 5 years since us leaving the EU. I was 20 when the EU referendum took place, so it was one of my first votes, actually. And I remember the results coming in very clearly, that sinking feeling of shock and sadness. And to be honest, not almost believing what had taken place. Because I think as a young person going into that vote, I went into it with hope, like a lot of young people in Wales. And there is still growing support from younger people for rejoining the European Union. But I think, like looking back then as well, one of the parts that was just most sad is that knowing a lot of my friends and people that lived in the same community that I did at that time, perhaps studying or working in the EU was an option for them, but now that isn't an option for many. And I think that is tremendously sad that in those years that have gone by, there's a missed generation that won't be able to have those experiences like previous generations did. And to me, being Welsh as well is being a internationalist, and I'm thankful for the quote that Gareth quoted in relation to what Reen had said this morning, because I am quite proud that as a member of Plaid Cymru as well, is that we've been quite clear on our position in relation to the European Union and quite proud of that position. And that is something that I think a lot of people in Wales feel in terms of being proud internationalists. Something that I think describes that personally for me is last summer, I was lucky to have the opportunity to go and support the Welsh women in Switzerland during the Euros, and having being surrounded by a lot of my friends as well, but stood in this stadium in Switzerland singing our national anthem, surrounded by Welsh shirts, is also, I suppose, that feeling of Wales being international as well. And that is something that I will remember, and I'm very proud that we got to have that opportunity for the Welsh women to participate in the Euros. And then actually something more recently, I saw a film just last week. I don't know if others on this meeting have seen it yet too. A film called Effie or Blaenau, which resembles as well about how I suppose our language, our Welsh language, our culture has adapted and changed throughout time in terms of different types of communities and what that means to them. And yeah, I think it's just important to express how international Wales is and always has been. But looking ahead, I think is although that this is a time to reflect, of course, where we've come to in these 10 years, I think what is important is to look at what is next in terms of the opportunities for rebuilding that relationship. I think something that has to be a political priority, and it's a choice, isn't it? It's a political choice, is making that case to rejoin the single market and customs union to support our businesses. But then to also, now that we have the opportunity in rejoining Erasmus, make sure that while we use that opportunity, that as many young people and also teachers have the opportunity to access that as well, and to promote that and to build on that opportunity. But yes, although I look back at these 10 years with a feeling of sadness that we've lost that connection, I also think that this is a moment for us to be hopeful and move on to the next stage. And as we might, well, as we will soon be having a new Prime Minister in the UK as well, that is also potentially an opportunity for us to move the conversation forward. But looking forward to the discussion this evening, and thank you for having me.
Right, diolch yn fawr iawn, Carmen. Mike, you're on.
Okay, diolch. Noswaith dda. Right, let's start with the very obvious stuff, which is the Brexit damage. And that's that 10 years on, we can see that those estimates to GDP hit of 4% by the OBR at the outset look about right. Some say, 4, 6%, others have said even 8. I think it's in the 4 to 6% region. And it, of course, has hit our trade, it's hit investment, and the pound has fallen and not recovered to the level since just before the vote. And that, of course, a weaker pound means that for an import-dependent country, especially on food and clothes, those basic costs have gone up, adding more misery on top of austerity that we had before, and then COVID. In fact, I think we've had a fivefold hit, A, B, C, D, E. Austerity, Brexit, COVID, debt from the COVID, because we borrowed heavily, and then E, the energy crisis that kicked off with the Ukraine invasion. That's quite a lot. Brexit is a big part of that. So we're in a fairly miserable place at the moment, but it's the kind of miserable place where populist right-wing politicians have a playground. So I think also it's clear that beyond the trade and the investment, there is also a sense that we lost some degree of opportunity, particularly for our younger generations and our more creative, world-engaged people. But also, we lost some sovereignty because in the EU, we did have a say over this big market that we're playing in, but outside of the EU, our businesses want to stay under those rules and we have no say about them. So we would have had a great deal of sovereignty if our businesses wanted to have a different environment, then we could tailor make that environment, but they don't. They want to stay in the stable, big environment that's designed by 24 democratic nations who are rather good at rule setting, which means we've just taken ourselves right out of that conversation. So it's been losses all round. There hasn't been any Brexit benefits, but there have been punctures and scratches and wounds and restrictions and tangles of red tape absolutely everywhere. Now, is this getting through to the public at large? Yes, and it's starting to get through at pace. Most people think now that Brexit was a wrong decision. About 57% do. They also think that Brexit has failed on its own terms. Only about 13% of people think that Brexit is a success. That's around the same number of people that believe in fairies. So it's pretty widely accepted that Brexit has failed on a lot of its own terms. And even with Leave voters, 58% of Leave voters think that Brexit has made illegal immigration, careful with how you use that term, but they use it, worse. So there's real anger on their part that the opportunities haven't been seized, but it's starting to dawn on many of them that those opportunities aren't so easy to get at. And maybe, just maybe, those opportunities will never come along. And maybe, just maybe, those opportunities didn't really exist, but they're not willing to let go of that yet. But it does mean that for us at this stage, there is an awareness that Brexit is a failed project. There is an awareness that the current government isn't going to deliver anything that turns it around on Brexit's terms. And I think there's also an awareness that if Nigel Farage were to come in, his extreme interpretation of what Brexit is all about is actually pulling further away from the EU, which only 15 to 17% of the population actually want. So the case for rejoining is really building. And we're not the only ones at EM UK to say that the 10th anniversary is a pivot point where you stop looking backwards and talking about the damage done and trying to litigate the past. You just say, you voted for that, we did it, didn't turn out well, did it? Let's talk about the next 10 years, because we're in a very different place now with Putin and Trump rampant, with China, Xi on the rise, clearly in a much more antagonistic, bully environment. And we've got our Commonwealth partners in Canada saying it's time for the small to medium-sized, liberal-minded Western nations of the world, or not even Western, but the liberal democracies of the world, to cluster up and just do things ourselves, forgetting the States. And they should be, according to Mark Carney, and I fully agree, clustering around the EU, because that is the bastion of where we can agree international law together. That is the model of how nations can do teamwork together. That is the tried and tested structure. And us in the UK, with our links to the Commonwealth, our good links to Asia, and being in Europe, are actually in a perfect position to be going back into the EU and pulling together this wider set of Europe stepping forward, where America is slipping into ways that are not respected by the West of the civilized world. So I think there's a lot of excitement to be had as well, not just on the local level at the thought of Erasmus Plus and opportunities opening for youth, but also at the thought of the UK getting back into Europe to help out on defence, to help out on new comms, new satellite programs, and new AI, because we don't trust the Americans one anymore. We want to build and build anew. And I think that Europe is now placed to become quite a location for a second renaissance. If you think about the brain drain that you're going to get from the States and from around the world that would usually go to the States, but now they'll be looking at Ireland and Germany and France and the UK and Poland's doing well. There's lots of opportunities actually kicking off in Europe. And if Europe can back Ukraine to beat Russia, and if it can go more autonomous with its fundamental tech infrastructures and what we use, it's quite an exciting place to be in. And I think these are the kind of things that we should be talking about, because as far as I'm concerned, the model of humanity is what we're looking at going forward. And that's going to be set by one of the big powers. And the big powers out there at the moment are the US, China, Europe as a collective, the EU, and India on the rise. Now, which of those environments do you most want to live in? Which of those environments do you think takes the best care of its citizens for future generations, giving them health and opportunities and agency? For me, there's no doubt that Europe is the right model for humanity. And we've got an opportunity now. Brexit has given us an opportunity to actually get back in and prove it. And if you can just imagine what kind of day it would be when the UK joins the EU, not as its 28th member, because that's probably going to be Moldova, and there's quite a queue of them, but the 30-something member, maybe alongside Ukraine, maybe alongside Canada, who knows, maybe alongside Iceland. But what we're seeing here is a real change in the world order that goes from that geopolitical level right down to a new understanding of what it means for citizens and youth and investment in local areas. And don't forget the regional investment funds that were pulled out of Wales and pulled out of Cornwall. And they were solid things that were totally European in style. We are your impartial guarantors of you taking care of citizens on the ground. That got pulled out, and then it was all down to party politics, pork barrel politics, coming too late, small charities going bust. No, we want the European model back here, which is all about citizens right at the bottom and their opportunities. That is becoming clear that that's what the European model is, and we've got a really good opportunity now that the tides are changing to go out and embrace it. And to put the Welsh angle on this, I do think, as Carmen was saying, that Wales as a respected nation within the European family, which does respect all the nations of the other Europeans, it's almost, Europe is almost more respectful of Wales and Scotland in particular as a nation than sometimes England is, right? Because there are lots of little nations within Europe, and people from Europe love the flavors of those different nations and the languages of those different nations and the unique stories and tourist attractions of those different nations. They see it like that. And I think that is the right environment for Wales. And I think that you can make a very patriotic and green and culture-rich argument on that basis.
Well, thank you very much. Both participants have talked about Erasmus Plus, but in Wales we did have I think it's only fair to mention we still have our tithe system, which is an exchange system. And there was an article in Bylines Cymru, I wonder who wrote it, about the advantages of keeping certain aspects of the tithe program as well as Erasmus Plus. In other words, Mike, it's how we can contribute our own particular things to the general good. Now, in Wales, there is a saying, Lloyd George knew my father knew Lloyd George. I have the distinction of knowing, well, my father buried Lloyd George in 1945. He's one of the officiating ministers. The other thing I know is that Rhun ap Iorwerth and is, of course, our local Senate member. He's a former pupil He finds it very difficult not to call me sir, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to knock on his door. So far, he hasn't answered to press the European message. But reading what was in the Western Mail today, I don't think we need to press the European message with him. He's fully on board. Are you ready now to accept questions? Right, pwy sy'n am wedi ofyn cwestiwn nawr lle? Rwy'n yn barod? There's a hand up. Joe's got a question. Okay, Joe? Anybody else?
Yeah. So So I guess this would be a question for both Mike and Carmen. So I was wondering if you had some thoughts on Iceland's referendum on the resumption of European Union membership negotiations, which this year has had increased urgency since the geopolitical upheaval with Trump and Iceland. Because I think that if the result is a majority for yes, I'm hopeful that people in Wales and the UK can be inspired by this to feel more inclined to follow suit. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I've got lots of thoughts on that because I went out to visit them last year when I knew there was going to be this, and the new chair of European Movement Iceland is called Magnus Magnusson. I'm not kidding. He is. Lovely guy though. I think the Iceland thing is fascinating because it was an accession process that was put on hold in started in 2009 after the crash, and a strong part of it was they wanted to be with the euro. They didn't want all the currency fluctuation differences between them and the euro. They wanted stability. But then in 2013, a new Conservative government came in and just put the pause on it. The foreign minister just put the pause on it. There was no vote in Parliament. Althingi is the name of their parliament. There was no vote on that. He just paused it. So then there were big demonstrations of that was undemocratic. It's not legitimate. And so when the new government came in 2024, they asked the Commission, by the way, can we all agree that was kind of like illegal that he stopped it and it was just frozen and we can pick it up? And they said yes. But the nice thing about the referendum that they're doing is it's just permission to talk. You know, do we have permission to just go and talk with the Commission about what a membership deal could look like? And I think that's a very handy step. And I have learnt from that instead of talking about a referendum coming up, we can talk about the next general election as a permissive step. If the parties put in their manifestos, we would open accession talks with the EU, and you have Plaid Cymru and SNP and Greens and Lib Dems and Labour all saying that on the same line, then it would be very likely that the majority of people at the next general election would vote for a party that said that. And then you could have, you know, that permissive mandate to go and do that on that basis. And then after you negotiate the deal, that would probably have to go back to a referendum. But that kind of permissive idea is a very good one. And I'll say one more thing very quickly about the Iceland referendum, and fingers crossed that it does come through, because it would inspire as a westward expansion. That's the key difference. And Greenlanders and Canadians are also interested in the EU. So that opens up a really interesting narrative. The other fascinating narrative that little Iceland would then open up, what would be to go into the EU, it would have to leave EFTA. And EFTA is a very small gang of Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. And so if Iceland were to leave EFTA, then basically the Norwegians don't have a partner there. Like the Norwegians and the Icelanders do all of their EFTA trade deals together and their EFTA courts together. They're not so bothered about the Swiss, but they're a little gang on that front. So if Iceland's saying ta-ra and leaving the Norwegians just like holding the can on that and going into the EU and then having a seat there and negotiating fishing there, that's going to provoke the Norwegians to follow suit. And there is a European Movement Norway as well, which is really picking up steam at the moment. So some really interesting dynamics around that. Again, I've talked enough of that. So.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. Carmen, do you have a comment?
I don't have much to add, to be honest. I think Mike was very well suited to answer that question with his recent discussions with Magnus, yeah, I
Yeah.
believe. But of course, obviously, having these discussions in other countries does give us something to also look at and learn from. It will be interesting to see how they handle the issue around the fisheries policy. But yeah, certainly one to watch, but of course very different to Wales and to the UK, but one to watch for sure.
The Scots are really fascinated by it because the Scottish, Icelandic, Norwegian sort of triangle is a thing. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. One of the advantages of Zoom is I've got 4 hands up. I know which order I'm going to ask you to speak. I've got 5 hands up now, but it's from left to right. So Elaine is the next one to ask the question, please.
Oh, good. It's just from the Sunday Times this week, and it's an article by Tom McTagg, and I know it's a right-wing paper, editor-in-chief of the New Statesman, and he wrote about his book. And quite interesting, you know, there's an awful lot in there. I thought, oh my God, somebody needs to counter this article. And he talks about it demands a political commitment to the idea of European Union and the loss of national democratic control as a result. Now, our democracies are already under threat because of what Trump is doing and Putin and everybody. You know, we're being squeezed into Europe in the middle to keep control of democracy because of the way they set it up in America and because of their policies with the tech bros making everybody poorer. I just would like somebody to write a response to this for the Sunday Times. It's beyond my abilities. So, Mike, over to you. You need to respond to this article because I think so many people, it's supposed to be the most popular paper on a Sunday. So many people are going to read this and think, oh my God, of course we shouldn't have gone. You know, it does a lot of damage to the.
So remind me again of what was the main thrust of it?
Well, it's all the strap line on the top.
The strap line on the top is 10 years on.
10 years on,
Politicians
still not
can't
being
be honest
honest.
about. Well, I don't disagree with that.
Saying about all this, oh God, and it goes on and on and on. We have to surrender this in order to get that, and I just thought, oh, this
right.
is so
okay. So in terms of the notion of surrendering, this is very conservative thinking. That everything is transactional and relationships are master and slave, and there's a winner and there's a loser.
Yeah.
That's actually quite a strong difference between right-wing thinking, left-wing thinking generally. I would say with the notions of sovereignty, it's like in investment. You invest in the shared structures of the EU, just like you pool money for the science program or you pool agencies into one because you're cost sharing. You know, it's a simple economic mechanism that helps size do more work than 24 splintered little regulatory engines. It's a massive cost saving endeavor, and so it's an investment into shared mechanisms in order to get more efficiencies and save costs. I think that's how it needs to be framed.
Yeah, somebody needs to write a long article in response, because I mean, especially in science, the joint operations across Europe, which thankfully we're still part of, but it just flies in the face of all of that. He's selecting his facts really badly, I think. But a lot of people will believe it. And it'll damage. McTagg, Tom McTagg, editor-in-chief of the New Statesman, which says it all, But it does need addressing. Thank you.
Understood.
Who's next? We done? Oh, Gareth, you're on mute.
But you could read my lips, couldn't you? All right, I'm sorry. Carmen, I don't know if you want to add anything. Carmen is also. Can I say that
I will
we've
have
got?
a read of the article. So
Yeah,
I haven't read
do.
it, so I'll have a read of it. But thanks for flagging. I'll have a look at it.
So it really upset me. I thought, oh God, here we go again. And of
Yeah.
course, Farage and the likes, they'll jump on it and use a lot of the facts which aren't facts, alternative facts. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I say that the order, you've got 4 hands up. Liz first, then Richard, then Iwan David, and then Eric. Okay.
Wow.
It's good,
Right,
isn't it?
thanks. Hi, Liz. Yes, so I'm part of the Welsh diaspora, so I'm actually sitting in Somerset, but quite a history of policy work for the Welsh government and the Senedd in the past. So, Mike, you mentioned that the European Union colleagues are only too happy to work with Wales, and mentioned culture and how nice Wales is. But actually, there's a more fundamental point here about multi-level governance, which I quite like to see the European movement embracing a bit more, which is that the European system now recognises the input from all different levels of government. So all the structures are now including the voices of local and regional government in decision making. And where we notice this, of course, Wales has been really active in the Committee of the Regions UK Contact Group and in the PPA, the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, as far as it can. And from the European side, they're really pleased to have this. But there's a constant battle with the MPs in Westminster, who have really kind of don't seem to notice that the Europeans demanding this. And it's a particular issue for the reset. Where is the voice of Wales? And I see from Plaid's manifesto, that they do have concrete proposals relating to Wales's position in relation to the reset, if it now goes ahead. But I'd quite like to know, Wales seems really well organised, with the cross-party group in the Senedd. And I know that the last one that ended, before the elections, I suppose. So do we know if a new group is now in the process of being formed? And is it going to be looking at Wales's activity in the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly and on the Committee of the Regions contact group? So I think there's some Anthony was in it, Rob Davis maybe. So
Well,
are you a member? Is Rob a member of the cross-party group?
No, Rob isn't a Senate member, but Anthony would be because he's
Yeah.
the Green representative there. Can I say that we found a chairman, Elred Williams from, well, he's in this constituency being Anglesey, Bangor, and up to Llandudno, Conwy. And he's agreed to be a chairman. And this will start again, and we hope really to have a group going by the 20th of July, because then they will have their summer break.
Great.
So we know that there are Plaid members that are keen. Anthony will represent the Greens. We no doubt will get some Labour members and the Dems, I hope, and that we'll be able to form this. But so we're working on this. And as you know, Wales for Europe is the secretariat for this particular group.
Yes, that's great. And are you collaborating with the APPG in Westminster, which is the Europe one, which is also the European movement is also the secretariat of that one? Is there some liaison going on here?
Oh, we cooperate extensively with the European movement, don't we?
But specifically with the APPG, though, I'm not sure the members in Westminster are that au fait, with what's going on in the devolved administrations.
Carmen, of course, is in the House of Lords, and she would have access to that information as well, would you, Carmen?
Yeah, so I'm a member of the one in Westminster, but unfortunately, they always meet on the time when I'm actually in the chamber, because of the scheduling is usually towards obviously what works best for members of the House of Commons, which makes sense, but often so not actively involved in their meetings, but do attend events. I do think there is there is an opportunity there for that closer link. I think that that link happens in other ways as well, so through Welsh Government as well. So
Yeah.
I know that, like you said, I know you mentioned BIPA and the Committee of Regions, but I know that Rhyn is going to Dublin tomorrow
Yes.
to have a meeting there, a ministerial forum meeting between Ireland and Wales. So in terms of that specifics around travel, trade, and culture, and going to London later this week to meet with the head of the EU mission. So specifically as Welsh Government, but in terms of the parliamentary between the parliaments, there certainly could be more working together. But I guess as well as we just entered a new Senedd term, session after the election, that it's a whole group of different people as well, which is a good thing, but also means that I suppose that needs to reset between those two groups meeting together, because of a lot of those members are new, as is the chair, Alfred Williams.
Oh, that's great. And my local MP is Vera Hobhouse. So she's the vice chair of the APPG, I think. But we still don't see much on the website and things about what they're actually doing. But another good thing, isn't the Irish presidency next in the EU? I think they're the next presidency.
Yeah.
From the mid of the year. Are they?
Yeah.
Is that true? I was just thinking it's a good opportunity to use the very productive links between Wales and Ireland, the Irish Sea links. So maybe more to be done with the Irish in the short term.
Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks.
Liz, by the way, is a very valued member of people who advise us in Wales for Europe.
Oh, thank you.
We make use of her expertise and we wish to share it wider. Richard, it's your turn now from Herefordshire.
Thank you. Well, I am actually interested in Liz's point about the Committee of the Regions, because I was in the European Department of the Foreign Office in the 1990s and managed the election of the first members of the Committee of the Regions, which was a very interesting point. But I have a question for you, Gareth, because you've mentioned Tithe.
Yes.
As well as Erasmus+. And I know that Tithe has been a more successful scheme than Turing ever has been. But I've just come before this meeting from a meeting of the European Movement's Education Committee, which is chaired by Chris Hammond from East Kent, and which has a number of experts, but including Andrew Hadley, who's chair of the International Learning and Leadership, Ray Kirtley, who's chair of the UK Global Learning Association, and Martin Kumela, who's editor of Skills for Growth. And they're very much focused on what's happening in England, maybe less so in Wales. And I know that the Education Committee is proposing to have an item on the European Movement's Council agenda on the 4th of July, precisely about promoting Erasmus, because those three people I've just mentioned have been working very hard on getting the message out, because a lot of people around the UK have forgotten what Erasmus Plus was all about. And will you in Wales, do you think you'll be promoting Erasmus Plus strongly to organisations that might support it, that might sponsor it, as well as supporting Tithe?
Yes, I'm sure they will. We know first that Tithe has been very successful. Read my articles in Bylines Cymru on the differences between Erasmus Plus and Tithe. And you'd see that there are certain differences which are quite interesting, really. We know that we have got the expertise. I'm hoping that the team will be retained, because one of the things that Rhyn wants to do is to appeal to the diaspora. And I'm hoping that these people are now the experts in making contacts and links outside Wales. So I'm hoping that, everybody's got to learn something from every new project that is successful. And it's the less fortunate in society that have profited most from the Tithe scheme. And that, of course, fits in basically with the Wales values, which are sort of left-wing and, can I say it, woke.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Iwan, dy drod Iwan, sy'n eisiau gofyn y Gymraeg. Paid y gofyn fi hir, de, neu fyddai'n gyfeithu'n hir.
That was in Saesneg. You mentioned in your introduction, Mike, that 30 is it only 13% consider Brexit a success since obviously it's 2016. The question I want to ask is obviously if only 13% believe it to be a success, a good up to 50% of the electorate tend to vote for political parties, Reform or the Conservatives, who have absolutely no intention of reversing Brexit. And the question is, I realise that Europe isn't the forefront of everybody's minds when they vote in elections, but how can you, because there's such a huge disconnect between the people who believe it to be a success and how they vote, how can you change that into a situation where we will have a situation perhaps in the future where people will be voting on a huge majority, which is closer to the percentage of people who believe that Brexit has been a disaster, so they're more aligned when it comes to electoral sort of results. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you change that dynamic? That's what I'm asking. How do you get it closer to yeah?
Well, if you think about it like stages of grief, that's one way to think about it, from thinking it's great to thinking it's had problems to thinking it's actually gone wrong, but it was still the right vote and it can still be salvaged, to thinking, well, actually, maybe it can't be salvaged, but if I'm going to vote for that lot, to then thinking, well, I'm certainly not going to vote for anyone who wants to pull us further away. So it is, people are on different places on that spectrum. And with some Leave voters, they're probably going to be stuck and you won't be able to get them back. And you're more reliant on the next generations coming through over the next few years to keep that gap opening up. But I would say that Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, SNP, Plaid are all solidly in the pro-EU camp in terms of their voter base and their members. Solidly. There's no threat to them. And Conservatives are in a much more precarious position because they've got about a third that are pro-European and 2/3 that sort of don't want to rejoin. But if you ask about things like Erasmus Plus or even free movement, then you start getting majorities within the Conservative Party that are actually for it. So the Conservative Party is a real target to go for. And particularly if you don't have to get them to vote for a party that they don't want to vote for, and you can actually, within the Conservatives, nudge them to thinking about traditional conservatism coming back in order to take advantage of the European Union sort of cultural plan, Agora. If you think about, the business opportunities, we want to be on the side of business. There are lots of ways which you can nudge them across. One of the things I've noted is that it's the 10th anniversary and you're not seeing Kemi Badenoch singing up how great Brexit was. You're not seeing much of it from Nigel Farage either. You're kind of seeing the defenders being the John Redwoods, the sort of Lord Frosts, Lord Hannans, those that have already pretty much left. They don't need to win any votes anymore, but they do have their pride to salvage from that vote. Those that are still leading parties are aware that dragging the UK further away from the EU is going to be dangerous to them. So I think it's a careful game in the middle of bringing people along further and saying, it's quite acceptable to want to build more here. And you don't want to get pulled further away, do you? And then massaging that with the politicians as we go forward and constantly pointing to the polls and how things are shifting. You want youth on board in your party, don't you? Well, they're certainly not with Brexit.
All right, thanks very much. I don't know if Carmen wants to add anything.
Just that in terms of the parties that Mike listed as well, you can see a trend in that there's a lot the majority of young people are voting for those parties. So hopefully you will see that shift as well in elections to come, moving like more parties feeling more comfortable in that territory, as we are increasingly seeing more parties feel comfortable in that territory. But like Mike said, the Conservatives and Labour less so, but in time, big tent, and we need as much support across the political divide for us to get there.
Can I ask one thing? I've thought this for a very long time. I think personally, I think Labour, if they need to be brave, they're not going to win the next election on the way things are going. Doesn't matter how good Andy Burnham is, because I don't think he's going to change the story really. If I was Labour, I put in their manifesto in 2029, rejoin, and that'll force the Brexiteers to defend the successes of Brexit. That's the only way to destroy Farage. This piecemeal sort of bit by bit thing isn't going to work really. I think they need to go nuclear in 2029. Because I think that's the only way to break this. Otherwise, this is going to drag on for decades. That's my particular. I'm getting too old for that. I just want it done.
I agree. It's also a very handy way to get round the restriction of the 3 red lines. You don't have to break the Labour Party manifesto on that. You just say, listen, in 2029, we're going to have 2 offerings there for the public in our manifesto. 1 is open accession talks, and 2 is proportional representation. And they go together beautifully, but we need to spend the rest of the Parliament getting things ready for that. So in 2029, this country does actually have the choice. We're going to make sure that you've got the choice of PR and you've got the choice of going back in. I think that's how it should be structured.
Thanks very much. Eric, you've been very patient. Okay, it's time. You'd better unmute, and then you can ask your question, please. You're still muted, Eric.
Oh, there I am.
You're okay now.
People have mentioned Labour. I was going to ask what people's thoughts on Andy Burnham were. Looks as though he's going to be the next Prime Minister. So what do people think of his attitude to the European Union?
Maybe Carmen go first this time.
Yeah, so a very obviously topical question, because that is looking like the most likely outcome in this situation is Andy Burnham as the next Prime Minister. In terms of his position around the EU, I think during the by-election he was a lot quieter, and it would be interesting to see now, since being elected, what views are expressed. I do think that if he becomes Prime Minister and doesn't express a vision that's really clear and ambitious, then I don't think the electorate will be forgiving. But we will see. I hope it's something that is a vision that is something that people can see their lives change at the end of it, and puts and also when you're looking at Brexit, putting country before party in politics in a way of like looking at the data, looking how much this has affected our economy, and being brave. And because I think you also have a huge opportunity to be brave when you have a massive majority of the kind that Labour currently have. So yeah, but obviously as a Plaid Cymru member, I don't know what the Labour strategy is.
Mike?
Right. I am going to agree hard with Carmen on that, and particularly the observation, and this ties into what Ewan was saying before, is that if Andy Burnham doesn't jump into a strong pro-EU vein pretty damn quick, the Labour Party voters are going to be very unforgiving. They do not want to see another Keir Starmer. They don't want to see Keir 2.0. I mean, I'm cautious as well, but I'm more likable, aren't I? So it's going to be okay now. I think the tolerance for that is extremely low. They're going to say, look, you had this quick coronation and everything, because that's how it's looking. You had a quick coronation. You've said you wanted to be back in the EU. So does Wes Streeting, who you're making Chancellor now, very probably. That'll be what the deal was. So, like, where's the goods? Where's the plan? Give us a plan now. We're all impatient. We want to move forward. We want things like PR. You know, the nationalization. People will love that as well, but the Europe issue is going to be big there. And it is. And if you think about what Labour's got left as its base, after all of those absolutely appalled by Keir Starmer's stance on Gaza have gone, who have you got left? It's kind of like the centrist holdouts who tend to be very pro-EU as their main thing. And if Andy Burnham is not going to seize that with two hands, and I fear that he won't, because I do fear that he's a bit of a flip-flopper, and I do fear that he is a bit cautious, I think he could look like a damp squib very fast. I think there's a real danger in that. And then Labour will be in a real mess, and the country will be in a real mess. But I can see it coming.
Well, obviously, we're speculating here. Eric, do you have a supplementary question?
No, I'll lower my hand, shall I?
Oh, okay. Liz has put her hand up again. She made a couple of interesting remarks in the chat. Do you want to make them again briefly, please, Liz?
Yes, I could. I had a different point though to say, but yes, there was today there was an all-day conference in London organised by UK and a Changing Europe, and it was the 10-year anniversary of Brexit, and there were there's a lot of blah blah academic stuff, but they had Michel Barnier speaking. He was there in person, and very, very positive, and he actually gave a very strong message saying definitely the UK will be able to get back into the EU. And I know he said this recently, but he said it again. And he also explained why it was also not just good for the EU, but good for France. So he had quite a lot of positive things to say, which I found quite uplifting. And I think the whole conference will, because it was web streamed, where there will be a recording. So it will be possible to have a look at it. Was that the only thing I said? The other thing, the comment I wanted to make was about Andy Burnham. Firstly, don't forget his wife's Dutch, so I think he's got quite a lot of personal contact with what's going on in Europe. But he's been really active the last 9 years, being the mayor of Greater Manchester, networking furiously with other European mayors, especially in Germany. And he's worked with, for example, with the Metro Mayor for Liverpool, and they've been on trade missions to Ireland and all sorts of things. And I think he's completely au fait with the European networking organisations like Eurocities. I think Cardiff's still a member of it. But, so I think he knows the European scene from the bottom up. And this is an angle that's being missed, really, in a lot of the discussions. So, in fact, there's loads going on under the radar with UK local authorities, especially cities, who are continuing to do European work as much as they can. And I think that the UK government is missing a trick by not looking at their expertise, in terms of friendly relations with Europe and what they've managed to do despite Brexit. So I think Andy Burnham, I think hopefully I agree that it's a bit iffy, as to whether he can go on with this now. But as you said, Mike, but I think he will actually do a lot for the devolution side of things, and that he will use this with his European experience and somehow work with certainly with the elected mayors, I assume, and that he must know what the core cities are doing, the big cities in England, and also Glasgow, Belfast, and so on. So I bet he knows what they're up to, and that he will be able to use that in making his arguments. But if he doesn't, I'll be really disappointed.
Well, thank you.
That's really well observed. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but good point. My fear comes down to his character and who he's got close to him. Does he have the cojones, if you will, but also because I think he can sometimes come across as a bit of a morose character. Is he going to really come across as a can-do character, or because he's not been in the spotlight in the way that he's going to be in the spotlight, where he is really grilled, where all the right-wing press come for you smelling blood, and then you're going to have to stand up in Parliament every week and actually take the blows. It's very nice being, you know, a mayor of a big city and going off and visiting other European countries and you know, chatting the chat. But I don't know how robust he is when the first political hits start landing.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Carmen, have you got anything to add?
I think the only thing to say is we'll have to just wait and see, because now is the opportunity for him to kind of put out that vision for while being Prime Minister. Because up until now we've just heard in relation to the more local context in Makerfield, understandably, but this is the time to hear, but also to push and put pressure on to push it in the right direction. And I just hope for you know, for across the UK, to be honest, that the decision made is a brave one and the one that's better for the outcomes of people and the economy. And yeah, so we'll see. I hope for bravery, but we'll have to see what the next few weeks what happens.
Right, diolch yn fawr iawn ti, Carmen, am dy sylwadau. And can I thank not only the official participants, but also the audience as well for their participation. This was timed for an hour, and it's 20:03, which gives you time, of course, to watch that game of football where Ghana's playing against somebody. So if you are into football, you've got plenty of time to see that. So I'd like to thank everybody who's taking part today, and wish you all well. And thanks very much for our visitors. Sorry that Anthony wasn't here, but we managed without him. He was here in mind, he was here wasn't here in body. Dyna ni, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd. Noswaith dda rwan. Noswaith dda?
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Okay, nos da.
Thank you.